Are you looking for a solution to your underarm uneven skin tone? Dove Even Tone Antiperspirant helps restore underarm skin to its natural tone. Its caring formula is infused with vitamin B3 and enriched with 1/4 moisturizers, leaving you with soft skin. So Dove asked women to try Dove Even Tone Antiperspirant and not peek at their underarms for 21 days. After 3 weeks, these women were saying amazing things, like, "That's such a big difference. This whole area was a lot darker, and I would recommend this a million times." So replace your current antiperspirant with the fresh fragrance of Dove Even Tone Antiperspirant and get 48 hours sweat protection while helping to restore underarm skin to its natural tone.
Do you remember the first time you spotted a container of Talenti gelato in your grocery store? Didn't it immediately make you stop and pay attention? Now, I'm a classic flavor kind of girl, so I love the Belgian chocolate. But if you're feeling a little more adventurous in your choices, you might try the pumpkin pie gelato layers. And don't worry, there are dairy-free options too, like the strawberry hibiscus sorbetto. You just really can't go wrong with a gelato made from scratch. So when you're making your grocery list this week, don't forget to add some for yourself or someone you love. Try Talenti gelato and raise the jar.
Did you know that approximately 40% of food waste happens at home? Yeah. That's why Hellmann's is on a mission to make taste, not waste, with some amazing recipes to help inspire you to fight food waste at home. Hellmann's is the magical ingredient that will turn what you've already got in your kitchen into something delicious. Use leftovers to make recipes like grilled chicken street tacos with creamy chipotle mayo or savory potato salad. It was incredible to see what I could whip up in the kitchen using ingredients I already had on hand, even some I'd forgotten about. Visit Hellmann's.com for more delicious recipes and make the most out of the food in your fridge with Hellmann's.
It's Friday, August 6th, 2021, and Roland Martin is off today. I'm Faraj Muhammad. And here's what we have coming up here on Roland Martin Unfiltered tonight. Folks, you don't want to miss this at all. Tonight, we got to talk about what's happening. Jobs report, the report from the Labor Department shows that the economy added 940,000 jobs in July. How many of those jobs went to black people? We'll talk to the economists about Chicago becoming known for raising the wrong home. We'll talk to the attorney for the Winters family about their latest event. In Orangeburg, South Carolina, a police officer has been fired for stopping the head of a black woman going in a wreck. We have the details. Police requiring proof of vaccination. Women's for death in Boston. Entrepreneur beyond becomes the policy we the black women are because should talk following talk to a coach about what should parents not take their children at a certain age. Dr. Dre's daughter, he's right. The whole support, all that and more is coming up with Roland Martin Unfiltered. It's time to bring the book. Let's go.
He's got it. Whatever the miss, he's on it. Whatever it is, he's got the scoop, the fact, the find. And when it breaks, he's right on time and it's rolling. Best believe he's knowing. Putting it down from sports to news to politics. With entertainment just for kicks, he's rolling. It's on go, roll, y'all. It's Roland Martin, yeah. Rolling with Roland now. He's funk, he's fresh, he's real, the best, you know he's Roland Martin now.
More Americans are going back to work. According to the latest report from the Labor Department, the U.S. economy added 943,000 jobs in July. The unemployment rate fell to 5.4%, which is the lowest it's been during the pandemic. Once again, the leisure and hospitality industry saw the most significant gains, adding 380,000 jobs last month, including positions for over 250,000 bartenders and food service workers. Earlier today, President Joe Biden emphasized it was his administration's initiative that brought us here.
What is indisputable now is this: the Biden plan is working, the Biden plan produces results, and the Biden plan is moving the country forward. We're now the first administration in history to add jobs every single month in our first 6 months in office, and the only one in history to add more than 4 million jobs during the first 6 months. Economic growth is the fastest in 40 years. Jobs are up. The unemployment rate is the lowest since the pandemic hit. Black unemployment is down as well.
That was President Biden talking about the efforts that his administration is making to bring jobs. Now, tonight, we wanted to start off the conversation about jobs and how they impact Black and brown communities, specifically as Americans are looking to go back to work, considering all of the changes from COVID-19 to job changes and losses. What is going to be the future of the labor market, of the job market? We're going to check in. Joining us to discuss the latest job report is Dr. Kristen Brody. She's a fellow in the Metropolitan Policy Program at Brookings Institution. Dr. Brody, thank you so much for joining us. How are you this evening?
I'm well, and I'm happy to be here.
We are happy to have you. Dr. Brody, I want to start off this conversation talking with you about understanding what does this number of 943. I know that we often have this as a metric of whether the country is quote unquote moving forward or not. But what does this really mean? When we hear that the country has added 943 new jobs in July, what does that actually mean?
So Roland's audience will know that I love to disaggregate numbers and tell the whole story. So yes, we did add 943,000 jobs this month, which is great. Overall, the story seems to be an improvement for everybody except for Black teens. So I want to give one more number. While we saw that increase, the number of people who are not in the labor force, but who currently want a job, who want to work, is 6.5 million. And that's up from 6.4 million in June and is 1.5 million greater than it was in February 2020. So when you look at the unemployment rate, yes, it's decreasing, but it doesn't count everybody who does not have a job and want one. There are people, if you haven't looked for a job in the last 4 weeks, then you're not counted in that number. So I think the first step is we need to consider these 6.5 million people who want a job and don't have one. Then I guess if we look at the overall rate, we know that the U.S. unemployment rate was 5.4%, down from 5.9 last month. 4.8% for white people, 5.3 for Asian Americans, 6.6 for Latinos, but 8.2% for Black Americans. So even though it's down from 9.2 last month, it is still the highest. And I guess the story is really interesting for Black teens because their rate in June was 9.3%. It's the only rate that increased, and it increased significantly to 13.3% last month.
And so if we're looking at those numbers, and I'm so happy that you brought it up because I think that's really the indicator. I mean, we started off in, like you mentioned, 9.2, now we're down to 8.4. We're still almost double than I'm sorry, 8.2, and we're still almost double what we've seen from whites and Asians. It still seems like we are still very far off from understanding how to handle this situation. What is contributing to this level of disparity, Dr. Brody?
So happy that you asked. So if we look at vaccination numbers, the CDC reports that of people for who race is known, 58.1% of people who have gotten vaccinated, we know their race. And so 61.2% are white, 17.2 are Latino or Hispanic, only 12.4% are Black, and that's one dose, right? So we know that African Americans are also overrepresented in customer-facing jobs like cashiers or servers, or in the medical field, caretaking roles, whether it's taking care of children or ill people or elderly people. And so we know that those jobs put people at higher risk of getting COVID. So basically, we're seeing that these people, our unemployment rates were always lower. And so these things are just exacerbating those rates. And nobody wants to go to work putting themselves at risk of getting COVID. And then we still have to think about childcare and transportation issues. Those problems have not been solved for the people who need it most.
And that brings me to that other question, which was, which jobs are we seeing kind of weathering the storm of COVID, or is kind of weathering the storm? I mean, can we get any indicators which industries are surviving at this moment from looking at this latest job report?
Yeah, so I think we're seeing increases in leisure and hospitality as people are going out to eat again and people are traveling again. The mask mandate was lifted and airlines were back to full capacity. Now we're seeing mask mandates come back because of the Delta variant. But Americans are smart, right? And they know that if they're going to be a cashier or a cook or a flight attendant or whatever all of these customer-facing jobs are, nobody wants to put themselves at risk of getting COVID, especially if the people that they're serving are taking care of have not had the vaccine or don't have to wear a mask.
Yeah. And I'm wondering, Doc, if we're talking about the mask mandate, getting back to that place, and there has been, at least in the state of Maryland here, there's been some conversation about, whether we're going to go back and lockdown. Dr. Fauci, he said, no, that doesn't seem to be the case. But with this new policy that we're seeing coming out of New York City, where folks are saying, hey, you're going to need to have a vaccination card. I mean, how do you think all of these factors will play into even affecting those the leisure and hospitality industry?
I think we've seen starts and stops, because in the very beginning, the CDC said that you didn't need to wear a mask. And then, of course, they said that we did. And then you didn't have to wear a mask if you were vaccinated. And now with the Delta variant and the Delta Plus variant, many cities and municipalities and businesses are saying that you should wear a mask indoors, even if you have been vaccinated. So I'm not an epidemiologist, never claimed to be, but I really can't say. I think that as more people get vaccinated, that, we should be able to slow this thing down. But with these new variants, we know that it's going to be getting colder soon. People aren't going to be able to do as much outside. So if we don't get ahead of this before winter comes, we may be back in a lockdown. I really can't tell you, but I think it's possible.
And as we wrap up this part of the conversation, Doc, what do we do with this information? How do we use this information, this latest data, to empower our people, to empower folks, to empower employers to get people back to work?
So I think the first thing is that we need to stop saying that people who aren't working are lazy or that they don't want to work. Yes, companies are offering bonuses. Some of them are one-time bonuses. But we have to understand why people aren't going back to work. Have they been vaccinated? Do they have childcare? Is the job somewhere where they can get to it? Do they have internet at home to even know that the job exists? So I think the first step is just to figure out who the people are that are in need and really why they aren't working, and to help folks understand that, yeah, people are getting these stimulus benefits, these unemployment benefits, but it kind of lets us know that we need to raise wages, right? I mean, if it is true that someone is making more from these benefits than they would have been making at work, that's a problem with wages, not with work.
Absolutely. Dr. Kristen Brody, we appreciate your time with us tonight to give us some insight about this latest report and this new jobs, and most importantly, its impact on Black and brown communities. Thank you, Doc. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I want to bring in our panel tonight to give us some more details and their thoughts about what they're seeing coming out of the job market. We're joined by Brother Michael M. Hotep, who serves as the host for the African History Network show, Dr. Nyambi Carter, who serves as a professor at Howard University for the Department of Political Science, and Kelly Bethea, of JD Communications. He's a strategist for JD Communications. Brother Michael, Dr. Carter, Kelly, thank you so much for being on the show with us tonight.
Hey, thanks, Faraji. You're doing a great job.
Oh, thank you so much. Brother Michael, let's start with you, because this is, when we have conversations about economic development, when we have conversations about what's happening, how do we get our people back into the job market? I'm not hearing too much, and I could be totally wrong with this, but I'm just not hearing us having a conversation in light of the latest numbers and some of the things that Dr. Kristen Brody shared with us. How do we have a conversation about these numbers, the unemployment rate being at 8.2%, and at the same time coming up with some ways to get our people back to work?
Well, that's why this show is so important. An in-depth analysis from an African-American economist focusing on this jobs report and how it impacts African-Americans. This is going to be one of the few places that we have this conversation. If we look at the numbers, now she talked about 6.5 million African-Americans who are looking for employment but can't find it. That's the U6 number, okay? The U3 number is the 8.2%. The U3 number is, there's 6 different unemployment rates, okay? The rate that you hear, the 8.2%, that's the U3 number. U3 deals with people who've looked for employment in the past 4 weeks. Okay, now people who have stopped looking for employment but still want a job, okay, they're not counted in that 8.2%. So one of the things that's important is to break down what these different numbers mean. And I encourage people to go to BLS.gov, Bureau of Labor Statistics, BLS.gov. You can read the unemployment report there, or the jobs report there, and find out what these different numbers mean. The other thing that's important to note, now this ties into what happened this past Monday. This past Monday, August 2nd, was Black Women's Equal Pay Day. Black Women's Equal Pay Day marks the day that the average African-American woman has to work until the next year to make the same amount of money that the average white male made the previous 12 months. So it takes the average African-American woman 20 months to make the same amount of money that the average white male made in 12 months. The average African-American woman makes 63 cents on the dollar. If we look at this piece here from CNBC.com, it talks about how African-Americans are participating in the labor force at close to the same rate as whites, yet earn 23% less on a weekly basis of $799 compared to $1,012 a week. So a lot of this has to do with the type of jobs that we're in, access to the jobs as well. One of the things that's extremely important, and I used to work in job placement. I used to work for a job placement company that focused on African-American communities. One of the things is extremely important is having culturally competent recruiters. Culturally competent, especially African-American recruiters, who are more sensitive to our issues, more sensitive to our needs, because we were able to get a lot of African-Americans employed once we focused on things like how to market yourself as a problem solver. Not just having a good resume, but performing well in the interviewing process. A lot of us get killed in the interviewing process. And the other thing when it comes to technology, and I wrap up with this, when it comes to technology, one of the things that knocks us out is the optical character recognition when you apply online for a job. When you apply online, this is an inside secret. They're looking for keywords that are already in the job posting. Okay, you score higher and get more callbacks if you put those keywords in your resume and in your application. It scores higher based upon what they're looking for. A lot of us don't know stuff like that, so we automatically get locked out because of technology.
Dr. Carter, I want to get your take on this as well, because just as much as this is an economic issue, it's certainly a political issue, and we often hear political officials and leaders talking about bringing jobs back. But I'm wondering, in the era of COVID-19, does that even make a difference? Is that going to move the needle to bring some level of equity, equality, some sort of, any type of assurance or comfort to the millions of Black Americans in this country that are kind of displaced and trying to figure out where the next meal is coming from?
I mean, I think the short answer to that is no, right? For many of the reasons that Michael just outlined. But I think this is one of the things that we always have to talk about when we're talking about these unemployment numbers, is that if you always look at the Black statistic, it's always double the national average, right? So right now, Black unemployment is around 10%, somewhere in that range. And again, Michael is right to point out, it does not capture those people who have decided that they're going to stop looking, right? Those people who said, I'm finished, right? This is doing nothing for me. So it's a nice point to make ahead of midterms, right? Because we're about to start that election cycle. It's a nice point to make when you're thinking about that next presidential election, which quite frankly just keeps getting closer and closer to us in the midst of a surge in COVID. And I think it also sort of brings up sort of the perverse nature of this pandemic. On the one hand, Blacks have been extremely harmed by unemployment, but then we're employed in sectors where we are over represented, right, or exposed to COVID-19 at the same time. So Black people are both underemployed and employed in places where they are at great risk for contracting COVID. And so it's a really sort of rough thing when you start talking about these unemployment numbers. And as Dr. Brody rightly pointed out, once you sort of disaggregate, it's not just that it's Black people, it's young Black people in particular that are being locked out and that are finding themselves time and time again outside of this great growth that Joe Biden and other presidents before him have talked about. So I don't think this does anything for those people to bring them any comfort, particularly when people are still hurting financially. The stimulus is still, a shaky thing for many people, right? It's just not enough of it, and it's not on time enough. When we just had Representative Bush and others having to sleep on the Capitol steps to push an eviction moratorium another month, but we all know October will be here and people will still be without employment, with housing insecure, and without all the other things they need to make their start.
Absolutely. Kelly?
No, I echo the sentiments of the panel, but I also wanted to point out just how insidious COVID was to the job market. A lot of people aren't really considering the fact that a large part of our job market died this year. Over 600,000 people died in less than 18 months. And a good chunk of those people, I'm not saying every single person was working, but a good chunk, a good percentage of that 600,000 was the workforce. So for people who are complaining of, how come people aren't going to work? How come, any complaint that is happening regarding COVID and jobs and job increases, the workforce died. A large chunk of the workforce died last year. And another point that has been echoed on this panel already, but the fact that people are finally realizing their worth in the job market is a huge reason why people aren't going back into the job market as quickly right now. The fact that we have been stuck in the house for almost 2 years, I mean, let's just face it, almost 2 years, and we were just as productive.
Yeah.
We were just as productive. We were just as hardworking, if not more productive, and got more deliverables out by being in one spot and not having to worry about traffic, not having to worry about office politics, not having to worry about the little nuances that actually get in the way of your job that you have to encounter because you have a job. Those things went away during quarantine. And people liked that, especially Black people. The fact that I did not have to deal with office politics and race relations was very refreshing to me. The fact that I could just do my work. For a lot of Black people, this is the closest thing to the white experience in the job market we've ever had. I'm not going back to an environment, hypothetically speaking, I'm not going back to an environment in which I feel unsafe as a Black woman, in which I feel undervalued as an employee, in which I feel like just a number or a token when I'm at home. I'm not only am I none of those things, but I'm actually better at what I do. So those are things to consider. And if employers out there aren't considering those things, they're in for a shock when it comes to this job pool and why they're not getting the quality candidates that they want and need.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, we're going to certainly have to see how things unfold, but I hope that at least this part of the conversation will get people thinking and inspired to get more involved. And like you said, Brother Michael, making sure that the organizations and institutions and spaces that are in our communities will do their part to get folks back to work. Thank you so much. Folks, the Chicago Police Department has been slapped with a lawsuit by a family who was the victim of another botched raid. Now, back in 2019, the Winters family was at home when they heard a loud banging on their front door.
Look over there. Is that him?
Red. First building south of the alley.
The lawsuit claims that an officer pointed guns at the thin 4-year-old and 9-year-old sisters, Shyla and Savila. Unfortunately, the Chicago Police Department is known for these kinds of botched raids. Now, I want to show this graphic of wrongful raids in Chicago. A CBS investigation uncovered more than 10 families whose homes were wrongly raided by Chicago police, including an incident where officers pointed a gun at a 3-year-old in 2013. Joining us now is Al Hofield Jr., the Winters family attorney. Mr. Hofield, thank you so much for joining us here on Roland Martin Unfiltered. How are you?
It's my pleasure, and thank you very much for having me. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Mr. Hofield, let's talk a little bit about the situation. As we can see the video, and the more and more, I have to be honest with you, sir, the more and more I see video of police interaction and engagement with citizens, I mean, you know, you're busting into the door, you're disturbing the home. There's this whole thing about pointing guns at children. I mean, this is getting to a point for me, Mr. Hofield, as I'm watching this, that it's beyond enough is enough. But tell us about, first and foremost, how is the Winters family holding up after this whole situation?
Well, it's been 2 years since this raid, which was in August of 2019. And Rashyla and Savila are still having real difficulty with their emotions, with the trauma that has scarred them. When I was out at the family's house on the 4th of July, actually, the morning of the 4th of July, and I spoke to Rashyla, and I asked her about what happened. She gets completely silent. She looks down, and then tears start to stream down her face. She is unable, until very recently, she was unable to verbalize, to even talk about in words what happened to her and her sister and how scared they were. At the time it happened, one of the girls wet their bed. They were frozen with fear. The other girl, Savila, was crying. And since that incident, since that day 2 years ago, they've continued to have nightmares, trouble falling asleep, difficulty concentrating. Rashyla has started to act out by cutting up clothing of her. She cuts up her new pajamas and other. None of these behaviors, none of these things were issues for the kids before this police raid 2 years ago, and they're still living with it. And they're unfortunately, it's likely that they're going to continue to live with it for some time.
Has the family gotten any type of therapy or therapeutic support for Rashad and Savannah?
You know, they've had some. It's not, it's not necessarily, if you don't have private health insurance, you don't necessarily get the best psychological care and counseling. We do work with some therapists who have a trauma clinic down at the University of Chicago. It's federally funded. So we're in the process of getting them additional counseling and treatment. And, certainly one of the goals of the lawsuit is to recover more than enough money to support high quality, ongoing care and counseling for them for some years to come.
And so, since this is a part, Mr. Hofeld, this is a part of a larger federal lawsuit. Is that correct, sir?
This is one case of 11 that my firm has brought. The graphic that you showed was terrific. 7 of those cases in your graphic are cases that my firm has brought. We've brought a total of about 11. All of them raise and focus on this issue of pointing guns at young children. And let's be clear, we're talking about young children of color. This does not happen by and large in white neighborhoods in Chicago. This pattern of pointing guns at close range directly at young children of color is the same across these cases. At the press conference the other morning, one of the things I said was, this is a different family, but it's the same case all over again. This has been a long-standing practice, as you pointed out. This has been a long-standing practice of the Chicago Police Department. It's gone on for decades in Chicago. The Department of Justice in 2017 said, among other things, CPD, you have a pattern and practice of engaging in less lethal, excessive force against children. And they specifically cited and discussed examples of pointing guns at kids. It's not only gun pointing. There's a lot of other forms of excessive force against kids. But because we cannot, because it's very difficult to bring this kind of case as a class action, what we have done something similar, but it's not technically a class action. Instead, we've brought multiple lawsuits, each one by a handful of family members. And I'm sad to say that we still have other cases like this that are teed up and getting ready to be filed.
And so, and I'm wondering, Mr. Hofeld, when we're talking about the pattern of excessive force by the Chicago Police Department, if it's that much of an issue, is this a part of their training? Are they trained to point guns at children?
Yeah, so there, it's a good question. I mean, so the problem is there is no clear, bright line rule about when Chicago officers are allowed to draw their weapons and point them at civilians.
Wait a minute, okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay,
so
there's no clear, bright line rules about that. So you mean to tell me that this choice, this decision, comes from the judgment of a police officer who feels like it is the necessary decision, the necessary move to point a gun at a 4-year-old during a raid?
That's exactly right. So what they're taught is that you're allowed to point your weapon when your safety is threatened, or maybe when somebody's non-compliant or resisting or whatever. they're taught a sort of vague general use of force standard, and then beyond that, yes, they're allowed to use their discretion as to when they think there's a threat. But of course, constitutional law is very clear that an officer is not allowed to point at someone who is fully compliant, who does not pose a specific threat to that officer or to anyone else. And the law is especially clear that when it comes to vulnerable people like young children, there's no reason to point at them. But officers have this broad discretion within these general sort of use of force principles and guidelines. And obviously what happens, in Chicago, officers come on too strong. They come out of the box using way too much force, partly because maybe they're trying to protect themselves, partly because, we have a problem with racism. We've got officers who don't see other human beings as fully human. So all these things come into play when they're using their discretion. And yes, they often wind up pointing at kids or at other civilians who are innocent when there's no objective reason to do so.
And that's just one of the details about this whole case that is disturbing. I mean, alongside of the fact that they got the wrong address. So I don't want us to minimize the trauma that has been inflicted just down to one detail. There have been many things. I mean, just the fact of busting through your door late at night and you got army gear on damn near, coming through your home with, guys just yelling and screaming is another element. But I do want to make sure that we bring up this point too, that I know that Mayor Lightfoot, the mayor of Chicago, has said that they're going to try to do a better job. The police superintendent, David Brown, said they're going to try to really deal with this issue. Can you talk to us a little bit about what is supposed to be the process for getting warrants, making sure that botched raids don't continue to happen? What's the process? Because there is an investigative component to getting warrants, to making sure that the whatever information is coming to the police department is good information, not just some willy-nilly stuff. So what is the process? Because there is an actual legal process to that the police department need to oblige by before a raid is done, correct?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll tell you the process, then I'll tell you the way it's been done, then I'll briefly tell you the reforms that, at least on paper, have been made recently in Chicago. I will note that the Evans-Winters case that we've been talking about was a warrantless entry. This particular case, there was no warrant involved, but there still has to be a probable cause, and there has to be a little bit of an investigation to support probable cause. But the other cases that are on your graphic, almost every other case on the graphic was a search warrant case, a bad search warrant case where they raided the wrong home. So generally, as people know, an officer is required to have probable cause before requesting a search warrant from a judge. So the officer conducts an investigation, and when he or she has enough facts to constitute probable cause, he or she writes it up into a complaint for search warrant and signs it under oath. So it's an affidavit, essentially, or a declaration. It's sworn testimony by the officer. The officer then presents that to a judge, and I should say, crucially, that an officer relies on an informant of some kind for the tip that is the basis for the investigation and that leads to the probable cause. So the officer is always relying on a John Doe informant or a confidential informant or a registered confidential informant. When the officer submits the complaint for search warrant to a judge, if it's a John Doe informant, that person may be brought before the judge as well. The judge reads the complaint for search warrant, is supposed to assess it for probable cause, ask any questions to the officer or the John Doe informant, and then make a decision on whether to approve the search warrant or not. And in Chicago, at least, I think it's similar elsewhere. There's an assistant state's attorney or an assistant district attorney that is also supposed to review the complaint for search warrant before it goes to the judge to, again, try to make sure that it appears to state enough facts for probable cause. Once, assuming a judge signs off on it, then it goes back to the police, and the police have about 72 hours in which to execute the search warrant. So that's the process. Those are the roles. What we've learned in our cases in Chicago is that police officers over-rely and sometimes exclusively rely on the word of informants who are often wrong. Yeah. And the officers don't confirm that the target can actually be found at the address the informant has given. They don't do anything to actually tie the target to the address the informant is given. So it boils down to sloppy investigation, over or exclusive reliance on informants, and then in terms of the reforms, there's now, we've been working with investigative reporters in these cases in Chicago for 2 years, and we've brought a lot of these issues to light. And eventually, as a result of the media coverage of our cases, the department started to make changes to search warrant policy and training. And so the recent changes are a product of our ongoing campaign here. And there are several important changes that are good on paper. It remains to be seen whether the department is actually going to supervise officers properly to make sure that the rubber meets the road. But now every search warrant has to be approved by a bureau chief. So there's much higher supervision that's theoretically required. Officers must verify a lot of other information that previously they were not required to verify. There's some language, it's very general and vague, but there's now some language about looking out for children and being careful to not traumatize them during the process of executing a search warrant. There's the body camera requirement has been expanded or is in the process of being expanded to other officers. It was actually only applied to patrol officers in Chicago previously. Now it's going to apply, I believe, to all officers who execute a search warrant. So there are a number of other, in the interest of time, I won't try to hit all of them, but there are another number of other important reforms that are in this new search warrant order, but no one is really sure yet how well officers are actually going to comply with them on the ground. That remains to be seen.
Wow. Mr. Hofeld, we appreciate your time to give us the latest on this, and we'd certainly like to bring you back on to continue to update us about this case. And please give our love and peace and blessings to the Winters family. It's such a tragedy that this is happening in Chicago, but it's happening across the country. But it's even more tragic when it's happening to small children. So please let the Winters family know that we are certainly here for them, and we would love to bring you back on to give us the next steps of this case.
I absolutely will. Thank you very much for having me, and I'll send your love. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Hofeld. Mr. Al Hofeld, who serves as the family attorney for the Winters family. Now, folks, also out of Chicago, a police officer faces 2 felony charges for shooting an unarmed man in the back at a busy subway station last year. Officer Melvina Bogart surrendered to investigators Thursday after the Cook County State's Attorney filed charges of felony aggravated battery with a firearm and official misconduct. And Officer Bernard Butler were trying to arrest Ariel Roman for allegedly moving in between train cars. Roman was shot after a struggle at the bottom of the subway station's escalators. Now, after the incident, the police superintendent said the 2 officers should be fired for, quote, violating multiple department policies. Bogart and Butler were stripped of their police powers in 2020 and placed on desk duty. Bogart was released on her own recognizance. Her next hearing is on August 18th. If convicted, she faces up to 30 years in prison. Let me go back to my panel here. We have Brother Michael M. Hotep, host of the African History Network show, Dr. Naomi Carter, Howard University Department of Political Science, and Kelly Bethea from JD Communications, who's a strategist there. First, where do we start with this case? Dr. Carter, we've talked about these police-involved shootings. We talked about, even with the situation of botched rape. What's next?
Look, I think you can't intellectualize this, right? You don't need to be a rocket scientist to know that something is rotten here. And I think when we saw here with Mr. Roman being shot in the back, again, moving between trains, was it worth the time? And maybe asking our questions, a little empathy would go a long way. This man is resisting arrest because we know arrest can be catastrophic in our communities. We don't just get to come back from those. And so resisting arrest over something really small and petty. Probably the biggest danger was to himself. So to then go from there to being shot in the back, right, in a busy train where that shot could have gone to anyone. It could have hurt anyone. It really made me think of Oscar Grant. And I think in many cases, like you just talked about in the previous segment with these children, the trauma that police are causing seems to be outweighing the good that the idea of them protecting the public, right, is supposed to bring. So I think, if anything, this again, it goes back to your earlier point, which is it about training? Is it about who we are attracting to the police force? Is it the fact that we've told the police officers that it's a us and them out there, and every day that they have to fight to get home? And so whatever means, whatever force they use is okay, because at the end of the day, we as civilians are the real enemies, right? And again, I don't know, right? Again, we can say defund the police and we can say all of these things, but for now, these people are still here and they're still employed. And we see, despite these calls to defund the police, cities actually investing more monies into police department. And so, it's hard to say what to do, but I do think one of the things we can do is get rid of qualified immunity. And when we start making police pensions responsible instead of citizens responsible for the lawsuits that are rightly coming from these misuse of force and these abuse and murder cases, then maybe we might see some movement in how the police think about treating their public.
Kelly, I'm wondering, when I see, and Dr. Carter, I appreciate that for that insight. Kelly, I'm wondering, when I look at cases like this, especially when it involves Black officers, I'm thinking to myself, do the Black officers understand the dynamic? I think that they do, but at the same time, it's like when you're in those very kind of, in the case of being in that train station, when you're in that moment, do you really, I'm hoping that Black officers at least say, you know what, maybe I should try to settle this in a different way. My concern is that black officers, if they're with their, with white officers, or they may feel like they're compelled to respond to a situation that is similar to what we've been seeing in over these past few years. Can you help me to understand that piece, Kelly?
I can try. Well, first of all, you keep saying JD Communications. That's not the name of my business. JD is my title.
JD, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Yeah,
Kelly.
JD is my title for law. But
Sure,
I just wanted to make clear. So that,
yes, ma'am.
yeah. So just for clarification, but you're right. It is, I can't speak for the mind of a black officer, right? I do know that I have friends in the force who every day put their lives on the line to make sure that we are safe in my respective jurisdiction, right? I also know that when it comes to my friends, they have the mindset and are very aware of police relations within the black community. So they, to my knowledge, from what they have told me, they do everything possible, really go above and beyond situations in which they don't do things like this, right? They understand that if they weren't in the uniform, that could be them with anybody else. Without the uniform, you are still a black man, you are still a black woman, and you are still considered a threat by way of your skin color. Your skin is the threat for a lot of these officers. So when a black person who is an officer does something like this, it makes me feel like, one, they should know better, but also